Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Dress and Drinks. I'm Leon Wiebers, professor of costume design at Loyola Marymount University, and welcome to the webinar, our Conversations on Dress. The Costume Society of America thanks you for joining us today. Please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Janine Head-Miller, curator of domestic life at the Henry Ford Museum. The museum is a complex in the Detroit suburbs of Dearborn, Michigan, founded by industrialist Henry Ford in the 1920s. This indoor and outdoor museum complex reflects nearly 400 years of American history. Henry Ford's collection is immense, consisting of over 26 million objects and documents. Janine's curatorial responsibilities include clothing and accessories, as well as domestic life related objects that range from cooking equipment, household appliances, sewing machines and tools, domestic foodways, musical instruments, toys and games, and domestic textiles like quilts and household linens. The vast majority of Janine's professional museum career has taken place at the Henry Ford, and she has held a variety of positions there over time, from historical interpreter and theater production assistant to archivist and curator. With decades of experience in a variety of creative and managerial roles, her interdisciplinary perspective provides many benefits in her work at this fascinating museum. So please join me in welcoming Janine Head-Miller. Janine, thank you for joining us today on Dress and Drinks. It's so great to have you, and I'm so excited to talk to you about the collection at the Henry Ford. I have to say, it's one of the museums that I've heard so much about. I've never had the opportunity to visit, but when you agreed to do the webinar today, I was like, "Ooh, I can't wait," because you have so many wonderful, interesting objects in your collection.
Well, thank you, and thanks to everyone for being here tonight. As Leon said, the Henry Ford Museum's collection of costume and historic clothing is kind of a best kept secret. You know, a lot of people, because of our name, the Henry Ford, kind of assume, if they don't know anything about us, that we are a car museum. But as you'll see, we are so much more than that. As you heard by the introduction, I am basically a social history historian, but someone who has been interested in fashion for a long time. But I do handle a lot of collections and a lot of topics, which sometimes can come in handy because I know the connections between many of these things and can enrich many of the publications or exhibits that I do. I have to apologize for some of my photos because we have not photographed everything in the collection yet. So some things will be, you know, very nice photography, and other things will be something taken with a cell phone. But I still wanted you to be able to see those photos. This is going to be a real whirlwind tour. I'm going to move pretty quickly through the slides because I'm hoping that the range of images that I present will give you an understanding of the depth of the collection, the breadth of the collection. So it's going to be more of a visual tour of the collection as a whole rather than a deep dive into particular garments. And you will see me, as you just did, glancing at my notes from time to time because they do help keep me on track tonight. So tonight we're going to see an overview of the collection, talk about how it's acquired. We'll talk about collection plans, documenting context, a little bit about exhibits, and our reproduction program. So I hope you enjoy the journey. Okay, here are some photos of the Henry Ford. It is an indoor-outdoor museum complex. Henry Ford Museum is like 14 acres of exhibits that include topics like transportation, communication, agriculture things, public life, domestic life collections, and decorative arts. Greenfield Village is the kind of traditional historic buildings that are in the form of a village. The buildings at Greenfield Village were all moved into here from other places. And they represent a range of history and a range of particular stories. Okay, so what's in our costume collection, or what's in our closet, as I said? I'm going to give you a quick summary. It's really quite a fabulous clothing collection, and it's really diverse. We have something like 5,000 clothing items and 1,100 items of footwear. So we're
Oh,
talking,
wow.
yeah, thousands of things. People can relate to clothing because there's a very human and visceral connection to clothing. And clothing, like automobiles, always gives a sense of an era just by looking at them. So clothing's really important, as we all know. And now the Henry Ford has had more opportunity to share this collection, both on the museum floor and in digital form. And two, we do loan objects. So we've loaned some of our clothing anywhere from Grand Rapids Public Museum to the Victoria and Albert. All right, so our clothing dates from the mid 1700s to the very, very recently. So you can see it's got a very broad range in terms of time. I will point out the cognitive dress there in the right-hand lower corner. This we recently acquired, and it is a dress that it reacts to social media content in tweets, and the colors change on the dress.
I have read about this dress. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
this dress was at the Met Gala in 2016. So we have clothing that's, you know, very homemade, clothing that's made by a dressmaker. We also have mass-produced clothing created in a factory, as
Uh,
well as couture. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. The strengths of the collection really are that we have everyday clothing worn by ordinary people. And this is the kind of stuff that often doesn't get saved, because everybody's saving their wedding dresses, they're saving, you know, kind of more important or very fashionable things. But like the clothing of everyday lives doesn't always get saved. But this is a strength of the Henry Ford's collection.
that apron is so adorable.
That was made by Susanna Hunter, an African-American quilt maker in Alabama. And we acquired not only her quilts, but also some things out of her house, as well as some of her garments.
It is so adorable.
I think it's Red Lion something. It's, you know, made out of a sack.
Yeah, no, exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much.
But at the other end of the spectrum, we also have a lot of couture clothing, mostly because of the Elizabeth Parke Firestone collection, which I will talk about in a few minutes. Then I wanted to show you some just some photographs of some other kinds of categories that we have. And in the next slide, you'll see that we have a number of paper dresses from the 1960s.
Oh my
I
God. Oh, Janine, you're like hitting all of my favorites. You're kidding me.
I'm glad. I did a small exhibit on these a couple of years ago, and acquired some at that time. And of course, this was a big fad in the mid 60s. It started with the Scott paper dress, which Scott paper company, if you sent them a dollar and a quarter, they would send you back this dress plus some coupons. And of course, it took off, it surprised them, And then a lot of other manufacturers got in on it. So probably the most iconic paper dress is the Campbell's Soup dress, which was kind of a homage to Andy Warhol, but was offered by Campbell's Soup. And then one that I was surprised to find, but acquired for the collection, is that Baby Magic maternity dress. Yeah,
I know. That's kind of amazing.
yeah. I found an ad for it and then I found the dress. And they say that it was designed by Oleg Cassini, but I think basically he just blessed it. All
I think
right.
I have a dollar. I think I have a dollar and a quarter in my desk drawer. Can I still send it off and get a paper dress?
I would try. You never know. And you will see, I'll be showing you a lot of garments, but not necessarily a lot of outerwear or undergarments. So I just want to let you know we do have those as well. And of course, we have footwear. These are actually shoes that I'm about to use in our next exhibit called What We Wore, which will feature 30 pairs of shoes. And these are
Oh,
some,
wow.
yeah.
I love the 1940s shoes. Those are stunning.
Oh, yes. Yeah, whenever I have shown those to people, they always really draw the eye.
And I'm a little bit jealous of the men's slippers, I have to admit. I might want those.
You might. They were very popular in the mid 19th century. You have to get someone to make them for you, though.
Oh, yes, I think so.
Okay, more accessories, hats and purses from a wide variety of periods as well.
Wow.
Okay, so where did we get it? Well, we got it where most people get their collections from, donation or purchase. You will see Henry Ford standing there with his assistants. From the 20s through the 40s, during the Henry Ford era, he was doing prolific collecting. I mean, he would get stuff by the train carload. Um, he didn't
Wow.
he didn't acquire as much clothing, but there were things that were coming out of people's houses where generations of people had lived in a home, because he had agents in like New England and they were prowling the countryside. So there were some interesting, very early things acquired as well. And probably most of the things during the Henry Ford era were donated. However, we don't exactly know because the record keeping was not as precise back then. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Of course, he also purchased some things. He had a firefighting collection, so he acquired several firefighters' helmets. And a lot of the clothing that you see over to the right actually was purchased from a woman who sold family clothing that was from her home to Henry Ford.
Oh.
And I'll talk more about that in a minute. This is also from the Henry Ford era. He had purchased or acquired a general store, which you see the picture of in the center there, and brought it to Greenfield Village. So being Henry Ford, he bought up the stock of 3 old general stores from like New York, I think, and New England. And he put all that stock in the store. What is so great about this is in the mass-produced clothing era, it gives us the chance to actually physically show more than one object, so people can visually really get that point of mass production. Because, for example, the blouses on the right-hand side, we have a lot of those. So that's kind of a
Really?
rare,
That's fascinating.
it's a rare opportunity that you don't usually get. So we were really pleased.
How many, I'm going to ask you a question. In terms of like that shirtwaist, how many other garments do you have in your collection that are mass produced of this time period? Where
Oh,
it's like here are 12 pairs of pants that are the same pair of pants or whatever it is.
Um, I can't tell you exactly, but if that duplication exists, it exists within the things that came from the general store. It's
Gotcha.
blouses, some knit shirts, a few hats, and a lot of undergarments like union suits.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. All right. So currently, of course, we get things by donation. And frankly, most of the clothing that comes into our collection has been received by donation. Here you see some things that I acquired this year. I love the little kids' Converse shoes, and
That's
I
so
was
cute.
I was really excited to get the pinwheel corduroy tuxedo in a color that was worn by a man at his wedding in 1973. It's so 70s. And I don't know about your collections, but it's often more difficult to acquire clothing that was worn by a groom. So it was really exciting to get this. And it's
And
so,
the ruffled shirt, that
I know,
ruffled shirt is just like the whole set is really great.
yeah, the velvet bow tie. Yep. And recently, I had the opportunity to get a lot of clothes from one family. And these are garments that are absolutely, it's lower middle class family, it's everyday clothing, and it's not high fashion. So once again, this stuff just does not always get saved. So I was delighted, and we also could document it well because I received it right from the family.
Okay, I'm loving the mother-daughter apron.
Yes, the Holly Hobby.
Oh yes, Sarah Holly Hobby. Those are wonderful.
Yes, they are. And the velour bikini bathing suit, very early 70s.
Yes, indeed. That's great.
And of course, we do buy things occasionally. We buy from dealers that you're probably familiar with, like Cora Ginsburg and Karen Augusta auctions. All right, now I want to point out a few groups of garments to you that are things that we acquired in like the last 30 years that are kind of we're specially known for or will be. So I would like to share them with you. First is the Elizabeth Parke Firestone collection. Here you see Elizabeth and her wedding dress, which she probably made herself, as well as two of the early couture gowns that she purchased, these by Peggy Hoyt. And Elizabeth Parke Firestone was, of course, married to a wealthy industrialist, Harvey Firestone Jr. And she was very aware that she represented her husband and family in the most influential business and social circles of the time. So she loved beautiful clothing. She understood it, and she acquired a lot of beautiful garments throughout her life. And well into her 50s, she was still the talk of the fashion world, and in fact was nominated as one of the best dressed women in the world by the New York Dress Institute in the 1950s. So a lot of her, the clothing in this collection date from that period as well.
Those are stunning dresses.
They are, they are, and many of these have been borrowed.
Oh, yeah.
We also received the archives of design sketches and correspondence between Elizabeth Parke Firestone and the design houses. So that's just incredible to have.
That's fantastic.
And of course, you saw on the last slide, there were a lot of Dior's. She also purchased from Balenciaga and Bob Bunyan during this time period.
Wow.
And Leon, you're doing what everybody does when they see that in person.
I'm trying to dive into the computer so I can just like go and try on shoes. That's really what I want to do.
These are Elizabeth Parke Firestone shoes, or at least a large group of them. And
Imelda Marcos has nothing on Elizabeth Parke Firestone.
not a thing. And Mrs. Firestone liked having multiple shoes of a particular style. So in case they got scuffed or something, she could replace them with shoes that were, of course, in pristine condition. And it's a little hard to see this from this slide, but when you look at these shoes, they're all arranged by color, and it looks like the shoe version of a Pantone chart. It really does.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. It's really great. I totally want to come and see these shoes.
Okay. Give me a call and come on over. Um,
Absolutely. Did she buy from the same maker? I mean, are these all
bought a
like,
lot of Delicata, and they were dyed to match. And some of the shoes still have little notes in them that say what dress they went with. Like I helped pack these back in like 92 or 89 or whatever it was. And I found at least 4 notes in shoes that said for Miss Anne's wedding.
nice,
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, it's really quite amazing. Now, another collection that we acquired recently in 2014, seems recent, is the Rodis family garment collection. You might be familiar with this because of the book American Style and Spirit, which received the Amelia Davenport Award back in 2017. Yes. Jane
Congratulations.
Bradbury, whose family this collection was, contacted us, you know, back then and asked if we might be interested in the collection, and of course we were. And when she was talking to me about it, I mentioned to her that I thought that the real richness of this collection lay in its context, not just in its fashion details. So Jane was off and running with Edward Mader and did a lot of research and compiled it into that book. And the book was a wonderful help to me, which I'll explain later. But the clothing in this collection ran from the mid-19th century up to 1980. Here are a few of the garments. We were able to get photographs of some of the family in a few of the garments, which was really exciting. Most of them, of course, are women's clothing, but there were also men's clothing as well. And here's a few more things.
Oh, that brown evening dress is amazing.
That came from Paris when the family went there. Yeah. And the walking suit. Okay, another very large acquisition came to us through unfortunate circumstances. The American Textile History Museum in Lowell, Massachusetts, which you may be familiar with, had fabulous collections, including a fabulous collection of clothing. The museum had struggled financially for a while, and in 2016 it closed. The staff then began getting the word out that they were looking for places to adopt their collections. And at the end of it all, they had placed their collections, whether it was one object or a lot of things, with over 120 museums and libraries. And Henry Ford was probably number 3 in terms of the numbers of things. We received some machinery, some print sample books, and of course, a lot of the clothing collection. And one of the things that I loved about their collecting is that they collect in the same way that the Henry Ford does, and also focus on the clothing of everyday people. Oh, so their women's clothes came to us, some men's clothing, and I think we might now be one of the capitals of Hawaiian shirts because they did some wonderful collecting. and we acquired many of those shirts.
That cabana suit. Oh my God, I want that. That is so awesome.
Yeah, I just had that on exhibit in a something on sports. All right, and we also, oh, the 18th century shirt that is up in the upper left corner is really amazing. That still survives. So that was a
Wow.
real prize. And of course, there was some wonderful children's clothing in the collection. Just really, really fine. So we were very grateful and honored to be able to accept, so much of this collection. All
Those
right.
little girl dresses are so adorable.
I know they are just beautiful things. Okay, so let's talk about collection plans, because we don't just get stuff at the Henry Ford because we like it. We do have collection plans that help guide our selections, because you can't collect everything. So these plans help us focus our collecting to better align with our mission, which is about exploring the American experience of innovation, ingenuity, and resourcefulness. These are the collecting plan themes that my colleague Nancy Breik, who was then the curator of the collection, developed back in 1988. And they help define the stories that we want to tell. But we also have to keep the plan current, because times change, things change. So a few years ago, we updated all of our collecting plans. And at that point, I called out things about acquiring recent American designers and brands, as well as things like the use of fabrics made for active wear that start to turn up in everyday garments, like the boys' polyester athletic pants that you see there. So here's an example of one of the themes and how it plays out. The adaptability of clothing to facilitate work, which in this case is occupational clothing. And so you see a range of things here, including a Playboy bunny costume from around 1970, which is, of course, what you'd wear to work. And interestingly enough, this was the first service uniform ever granted registration by the Patent and Trademark Office. That was kind of interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. That is awesome. See the things you learn every day. That's amazing.
The importance of clothing in the development of a culture of increased leisure and recreation. So here you see things like baseball uniforms, cycling suits, some homemade beach pajamas, which actually were my grandmother's, as well as that lovely cabana suit. And the importance of clothing in the celebration of social, ritual, and life events. And this can range from the first day of school to first communion and bar mitzvah to quinceañera to going to the prom or getting married or graduating.
Oh, wow.
The importance of clothing in documenting the interaction of dominant, subordinate, and oppositional cultures. Here you see a dress, in fact, it's hanging on a door in my house in this photo, that I acquired very recently, and I was very excited to get it. The Brethren in Christ Church are an outgrowth of the German Baptist Dunkard Church, kind of on the order of Mennonites. And this dress dates from like the 1920s. I was very excited to get it. And it's really exciting that it's actually, 100 years old, because most of that clothing probably doesn't exist anymore. And then, of
And it
course,
looks like it's in great condition.
it is in pretty good condition. The sweater and shoes were worn by DJ Kool Herc, who was a very influential hip hop DJ and rapper in the Bronx, and he's considered to be the founder of hip hop music. We are very excited to get this and recently purchased those at auction. More clothing that's from documenting the interaction of dominant, subordinate, and oppositional cultures is this counterculture clothing of the 1970s. We have some very, very nice pieces that really just bring the era to life by seeing them.
Those jeans are great.
And then, of course, we also collect clothing that relates to broader and other stories that we tell in the museum. For example, we have the Rosa Parks bus, which is the bus that she refused to give up her seat to a white man in 1955, breaking the segregation laws, and it was the event that sparked the civil rights movement. So we do have a Montgomery, Alabama bus driver's uniform. And this I Like Ike dress is another recent acquisition. And it says I Like Ike all over it. It's absolutely wonderful. And it relates to our collections on presidential elections.
I'm astonished that you have the Rosa Parks bus. That just blows my mind.
Yeah, I know. We're very, very, very pleased to have that and be able to share its story. Okay, gathering the context. This is something I'm really, really big on, and you guys probably are as well. But gathering the background information on a garment, on its wearer, on its maker is really important for both documentation purposes, but also interpretive purposes. And it's really important to do this when you acquire an item for the collection, because that's your best shot at being able to gather all of that information. Now, remember when I said they didn't keep good records back in the Henry Ford era? We have a fair amount of things received from unknown sources. And don't you just wish those things could talk and tell you where they've been? But unfortunately, that is lost to us. As I mentioned before, one of the collections that is the best documented in our collection is the Rada's collection, because Jane and Edward had done so much research, compiled it into the book, and Jane was very generous with not only donating the collection, but also these photographs and ephemera and other materials that had belonged to the family. So you see Gussie's prom dress from 1932 there, and there's a photo of her. I have a blue arrow pointing to her. There she is in the collection wearing the dress, and that is her dance card from that. And we collect things here that we don't just collect data, we collect what we call related reminiscence. And we ask people, and most people will do this, but not everybody necessarily, but we ask them to write out something about the object that they have given us, not only for clothing, but for other things in the collection. And they are so, so powerful. I don't know if you all can read this quickly enough, but this woman who is in her 90th year, she says, donated this beautiful cape that she received in 1947 to wear to her prom. And as she says, her dad was going through some really bad medical stuff at that time. And so the cape, when she wore this to the senior prom, it let her escape from some of the reality that her family had to deal with during that time. Stories like these make garments so relatable to people. Then there are the funny stories. The family that we received a lot of the lower middle class clothing from, the donor's grandmother had made all these little outfits. Remember when it was popular to put kids' names on their clothing? She made these for Christmas of 1977 for all her great-grandkids, and the kids were all supposed to wear them to the 50th anniversary party, which was, I think, the following spring. Well, when that day came, she forgot to put her kids in the outfits. And of course, that did not make her grandmother very happy. But they're adorable. They're very of their era in the 70s, and it's wonderful having this story to go with them.
Very sweet.
Okay. Now, sometimes you have to look for the stories. Some things in your collection you won't know anything about, but as we all know, sometimes there are clues. We had gotten this dress from a family, and inside the dress was the name Mary Stevens. So I was able to figure out, who she was. I found a newspaper article about her mother giving this big reception in the house right before Christmas of 1884. And I even figured out where their house was in Detroit. It's now where the main branch of the Detroit Public Library was. But I was able to, I would be surprised if this wasn't the dress that she wore to that occasion. So not only in this exhibit did we talk about fashion related things like, how'd you hold up that bustle, but each of the labels also said who wore this dress. So I used that research information in there. Okay, now we're going to take a look at things on exhibit in Greenfield Village, the outdoor museum. And of course, like any historic place, there's often a piece, a bonnet or a dress or something staged in a building. So there's a period bonnet on display in the Webster House. And most of the clothing collection that is on display in Greenfield Village is in a building called Mrs. Cohen's Millinery. And you can see the hats that are in the case are the original hats. The ones out on the counter are reproductions that people can try on that are made there. Okay, and we change the hats out twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, so that they would be the season of hats that she would have been making at that time.
Oh,
All
very
right,
nice.
Henry Ford Museum. All right, here's one of the reasons why we are the best kept secret. You will see a building called Isabella Bradley Millinery and Fancy Goods Shop. It was part of the street of shops built in the museum it was there from the 1930s into the early 80s. This was really about the only place where they exhibited clothing for many, many years. When we built a large temporary exhibits gallery that gave us a place to do exhibits like this one called Vintage Couture, which was done by my colleague Nancy Breik back in 2005. And it featured many of the garments and the shoes from Mrs. Firestone's collection. And this was a more recent exhibit that I curated a number of years ago. And here we displayed garments from the Rodis collection. I can talk like an entire thing about this, and I have given a talk on this at CSA, I think back in 2018, on using visitor studies to do exhibits, but I'll just give you the short version. We did some testing with visitors to see how they reacted to clothing, showed some pictures to them of the clothing. It was interesting because visitors react to clothing in a very personal way. They talked about what they liked, what they thought was ugly. Somebody told us he liked a dress because it reminded him of his mom, or somebody else said, oh, that looks like something I Love Lucy would wear. So people are coming at these garments in a very personal way. We tested 5 themes with them to see what they were most interested in. not surprisingly, because we are a history museum, the two that floated to the top were what these clothes tell you about the family who wore them and what these clothes tell you about what life was like during particular time periods. They were less interested in the hardcore fashion things. This is one of the labels that I did for this exhibit. This is where I was able to use quotes from a letter that you see. It's always great when you can let the people who use the garments or make them speak for themselves. So I tried to do that as much as I could. Then I wrote a little story about Augusta choosing this outfit because I knew enough about her by then that I could feel like I wrote this and it really reflected her. Each section also gave the broader context. This label was in the shopping section, so the broader context information was about department stores of the era. There's also, of course, the, it's hard to see here, but the object IDs that give, the maker, the date, the fabric, things like that. And then there was often a look closer little item that would also focus on fashion. By dividing up the information like this, people can glance at these labels and go to what they might be particularly interested in. It also breaks it up and makes it easier to read. Here are 3 sections of the exhibit, so you can see a little bit more of it. And instead of like just dumping a lot of information on people, I let them discover the story of the family as they went from section to section. So in the end, that discovery kind of put the whole story together for them, but I didn't overload them with it, and I let them explore.
Writing a didactic is an art form.
It is. It is. It took me a long time to do all that. I'm really delighted that out of the Rodas exhibit, people involved in that financed this case in the museum. We call these collection platforms. They are focused around a particular type of collection, in this case clothing. We call it What We Wore, and I change it out every 4 months. And we have done a variety of topics, a variety of time periods. So this one was called A Matter of Emphasis, and it talked about how fashion can manipulate the human body. And you see the bustle dress in there. Then we did Traveling by Ocean Liner, Dressing the Parts. And what's wonderful is because we have all these other artifacts, we can put props very easily into these cases, which help make it more immersive for people and help draw their eyes. And once again, these are all garments from the Rodas collection. And this one was called Unpacking a Trunk. And these are those garments that came in that trunk that Henry Ford bought in 1935 from a woman whose family had kind of, a lot of the generations had gone, and you can just picture, she's like, what am I going to do with all these things? And she knew Henry was collecting, so she wrote to him. And what's nice about this, besides the fact the early clothing is really cool, including sleeve puffs, which you can't see too well there, which those don't usually, survive from the 1830s. But it gave people a behind the scenes look at how the museum came together, as well as some interesting information about some period clothing. I should mention too that each of these exhibits has an accompanying blog post. So I've put that in the slide, but if you just search, Janine Head-Miller blog, the Henry Ford, you should find a lot of them. And if you put in What You Wore or What We Wore, it'll, I think, help too. And this is the exhibit that's currently out there. You saw earlier this, perhaps if you remember, that we purchased these garments at auction, and we were able to exhibit them. They are out there now. They will be down in a month. But this was a lot of fun to do. her whole thing is about movement and clothing movement. So I asked the conservator staff who dresses the mannequins, I said, can you make them look like they're moving? And they did. And a lot of, I see people walking up to this that are like middle-aged, and the way they're reacting, you know, they're remembering.
Oh,
So they,
absolutely. And I love this. Like Bonnie
yeah,
Cashin is having a revival right now. I've been hearing about her and people are starting to collect her in really interesting ways. And there are a couple of CSA members whose collections are very rich in Bonnie Cashin work. I'm thinking of the Ohio State University has a very large collection of Bonnie Cashin and patterns. So if Gail's in the audience, like Gail Streggy and you should get together and talk about Bonnie Cashin.
yes, we should. I do know Gail.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are a few single items on display from a number of items of clothing that relate to auto racing that are in our Driven to Win exhibit in Henry Ford Museum. And this wonderful Amelia Earhart brand blouse that I acquired years ago. It is in our Heroes of the Sky exhibit. I have never found yet, not that I've looked everywhere, but if anybody else has any Amelia Earhart brand garments in their collection, I would love to know about it.
I am amazed that she has had a brand. That's
It
fascinating.
was very, very brief, very brief. And I did do a blog on that as well. Okay, we also reproduce garments. Our studio staff of seamstresses create garments for our period clothing and living history programs. Things like the garments that you see here. There's the studio staff. On the day they came to
Wow.
visit all the new things from the American Textile History Museum, so I took this photo to send it back to my colleagues there. So they research garments often from the originals that we have. And a couple of times so far, they have done exact reproductions, including this 1880s cotton dress and this 1890s skating suit. It was amazing what they went through to create that skating suit.
Hmm.
It's just really exquisite. They also come and they'll call me up and say, can I look at blah, 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 and I'll take them into storage and they'll look at details on other sorts of garments. There's a coat being made right now that has a lot of braid trim on it that was inspired by something in the collection. So that's so great to be able to see
That's
them
fantastic.
in this way. And to make our collections accessible, like others, we have a collections website on the internet. And here's what the page looks like if you do a search on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you can kind of see what, if you click on an object, the kind of information that is offered to you. A few of these things have detail shots of construction, not too many though. And not
Mhm.
all the clothing is on here, but many garments are. So thank you. Thank you for coming.
Fantastic.
And
Thank you, Janine. This was amazing. What a huge collection.
it is.
Um, that I mean, that's just astonishing. And I love that you shared your collecting guidelines because it's pretty unique. So I have a first question that I want to kick these last few minutes off with is, do you have any non-Western garments? I mean, even though your collection is around very much the American history, do you have garments that are from immigrants or other countries once they've come to the U.S.? You've shown us a lot of Western garments. Do you have non-Western things?
We have mostly white middle class garments because of the way that museums collected for a long time. We do have a dress that actually we received from the American Textile History Museum that was worn by a Greek immigrant who came here in the 19 teens. Getting more diversity in our clothing collection is a priority. And
Right.
we are, working towards that. The DJ Cool Herc sweater is, part of that, representing hip hop culture. So it is something we need to pay attention to, and we have been increasingly gathering things. So we have a dress that was worn by a trans woman
Great.
in collection. Yeah. So we're very anxious and open to diversifying our collection.
And are you still collecting? I mean,
Oh
many
yeah.
museums face the like, we have too much stuff. What are we going to do? So it's great to know that you still have space to grow.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so we have a few questions and comments in the chat that I want to address. So Patricia, thank you. This goes back to the paper maternity dress. She states that maternity fashion is so overlooked. The next question that is posted is, how do you decide what to buy at auction, and do you spend whatever it takes, or do you set a price limit?
Okay. Deciding what to buy at auction goes along with the collecting guidelines. What makes sense for the Henry Ford? Frankly, we don't purchase a lot at auction, and we do not spend whatever it takes. I have lost some things. We set a price on what we feel the garment or accessory is worth to us.
Right. Yeah. Um, a comment is that Ms. Firestone seems to be was a very petite woman, was she?
Her shoes were like size 5, and she had a petite figure throughout her life.
Wow. A comment is that apparently you also have the Kennedy assassination limousine.
We do.
Wow. Wow. Like, you are the best kept secret.
Yes, you all need to come visit me.
Um, and another comment is the trunk garment. Oh my God, OMG, the trunk and garments are so awesome. So, I wish like to have seen the sleeve puff inside of that. I know it was like peeking out of the trunk, but that looked amazing.
It was, and that will be on our digital website if you want to look that up. And the conservators had to clean that, and it just killed them to take out a few of the hand stitches in there to be able to clean it and then stitch it back up again. But I was
Yeah,
just amazed when I
yeah.
saw those.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
There's another comment in the chat from Joan. I am an appraiser and remember seeing an old auction catalog of her clothing and hearing that about her size, Ms. Firestone.
Hmm.
Um, so, um, Janine, thank you so much. I have a dozen more questions that I want to talk to you about. One of them actually is, how do you approach digitizing your garments? Because you have, as you said, you have some that are really nicely photographed, and you have others that are on a hanger on your door in your home. So, which is, I mean, so many collections face that.
Yeah.
So, how is it that you approach that?
Okay. Well, the one hanging on the door in my home is because I'm working mostly from home. And I acquired that dress from a neighbor, and I had to take a picture of it for the collections committee. But we have a very robust digitization process. But of course, you can't quickly do everything. But we have catalogers in the registrar's office who catalog the object. We have photographers who take the photographs, and then they are uploaded from our database to our web portal. Um, but there have to be numbers sewn on, and clothing, you got to put it on a mannequin, and so it takes longer
It
to.
takes much
They
more
will,
time.
yeah, they will, especially with quilts too. They will wait until there's a group of things because they have to do special setups for that. And then they will photograph a lot of quilts at the same time, or they will dress a lot of mannequins. But everything that is on exhibit in the museum and village that goes out, we catalog so that it's available on the web.
One last question for you. Are you able to do specific tours for students in research classes?
We are asked at from time to time to do special classes, or to do, special tours. So I would just say contact me and we can
Yep.
talk about it.
Excellent. So we're a little bit over time, but Janine, thank you so much for such a fabulous, fabulous introduction to the Henry Ford Museum. It was really spectacular. You have, I mean, and we haven't even begun to talk about sewing machines. So, so thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for coming today. Janine, thank you so much. Have
Thank
a lovely evening, and thank you again for your time.